He was once the most dangerous man in Hollywood, not because he was violent, but because he was beautiful. And he knew it. The industry couldn't control him. The camera couldn't look away. And we couldn't stop falling for the myth. But that myth collapsed. Today, Mickey Rourke lives in a one-bedroom apartment he's about to lose. In debt over $500,000, barred from most major studios, and unrecognizable to the very world that once crowned him the next Brando. So what happened? There's one scene, one scandal, one moment where it all came crashing down. It's not the boxing ring. It's not the plastic surgery. It's not even the mugshot. It's a love scene, shot in Brazil, that was never supposed to be real. And a betrayal, buried beneath the frame? Because this isn't just a story about a man who lost his looks. It's about what happens when the very system that made you a sex symbol turns around and calls you obscene. This is the price of rebellion. This is the cost of pride. This is the fate of a man who refused to play by the rules. This is the heartbreaking reality of Mickey Rourke. Before we talk about the fall, we have to talk about the fallacies. Because Mickey Rourke didn't get pushed out of Hollywood. He walked out. One no at a time. From 1984 to 1994, Mickey had the entire kingdom at his feet. Scripts from every major studio. Directors begging. Agents salivating. He wasn't just the next big thing. He was the only thing. But he didn't want to play the game. Didn't want the studio paycheck. Didn't want the box office numbers. He wanted purity, art, control. And that was his first mistake. He turned down Beverly Hills Cop, the role that made Eddie Murphy a global phenomenon. He passed on Top Gun, letting Tom Cruise become a pop culture god. He skipped Rain Man, The Untouchables, and even Platoon. One Oscar opportunity after another. Flushed. But it's Pulp Fiction that haunts the loudest. Quentin Tarantino, a fresh, hungry director. He wrote the role of Butch, the washed-up boxer, with Mickey in mind. It was personal. It was perfect. It was a love letter. But Mickey said no. He didn't trust the studios backing it. Didn't want to be controlled again. So Tarantino gave it to Bruce Willis. And Bruce Willis came back from the dead. Mickey? He kept digging. Kept searching for truth in scripts no one would ever see. He would later admit, "I probably made some political mistakes in Hollywood. I was doing movies 6 people saw. This wasn't just bad luck. It was a self-engineered exile, a slow-motion exit from the machine that once promised him the world. But he wasn't running away from fame. He was running towards something darker. And he'd find it. On a humid film set in Brazil. With a woman who would change everything. Before it was a scandal. It was a fantasy. And before it was a fantasy. It was a warning. In 9.5 weeks, Mickey Rourke became a sex symbol. In Wild Orchid, he became a punchline. It was 1,989. The role was supposed to elevate him again. A raw, seductive performance with a new face on the scene, Care Otis. But what happened on set would blur every line between fiction and violation. The love scene at the end of Wild Orchid wasn't just controversial. It was radioactive. The rumor? That Mickey and Care had real sex. On camera. In front of a crew. Under the lights. With the director. Watching. The film was originally rated X. The MPAA called it explicit beyond narrative necessity. Scenes were sliced. Shots were buried. But the damage was already done. The director, Zalman King, leaned into the ambiguity. He never confirmed, never denied. Because controversy sold tickets. And in Hollywood, even rumors have currency. Carey and Mickey both denied it was real, but whispers kept swirling. A crew member later said, "Pretending to make love in a room with 20 people watching? That's not intimacy, that's performance. No one's doing that for real." But public perception didn't care. To audiences and critics, he wasn't acting anymore. He was crossing lines. And suddenly, he wasn't a method actor. He was a liability. The industry turned cold. Studios stopped calling. He went from Angel Heart to the Razzies-nominated Worst Actor. And the pretty boy face became a symbol of something ugly. But the scene wasn't just a career killer, it was a prophecy. Because Mickey and Carey's real relationship would become the most violent, painful chapter of his life. What began in seduction ended in police reports. And just when Hollywood thought Mickey couldn't spiral further, he walked into a man's office with a baseball bat. There are unspoken rules in Hollywood. You don't hit a producer. You don't curse at a studio head. And you definitely don't walk into Samuel Goldwyn Jr.'s office holding a weapon. But Mickey Rourke was never good with rules. The year was 1987. The film was A Prayer for the Dying, a gritty, moody thriller about guilt and redemption. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. Mickey had poured himself into the role. He saw it as art, a character piece. But once the studio got involved, the cut was changed. Scenes restructured. Depth traded for commercial pacing. To Mickey, it was betrayal. To Samuel Goldwyn Jr., it was business. So Mickey showed up, alone, with a baseball bat. What happened next has been whispered about in industry circles for decades. Never officially confirmed, but too loud to ignore. He slammed the bat on Goldwyn's desk. Didn't swing it, didn't use it, but he didn't have to. The message was clear. You ruined my work, so I'll ruin your office. The fallout was immediate. Rourke was unofficially blacklisted, not by decree, but by silence. No studio wanted to insure him. No director wanted to risk him. Because Mickey Rourke was now seen as dangerous. Not in the way that sells movie tickets, but in the way that breaks glass. Years later, he would call it stupid. But by then, the bridges were already ashes. The most powerful man he'd ever fought wasn't in a boxing ring. It was a producer in an office. And the scars would last longer than any punch. But Mickey still hadn't hit bottom. That would come next, when he stepped out of the spotlight and into a real boxing ring. Not for a role, not for a film, just to feel something again. There's a certain kind of pain that fame can't shield you from, and Mickey Rourke went looking for it. In 1991, when Hollywood closed its doors, he stepped through another one, into the ring. Not a movie set, not a choreographed fight, but real blood, real punches, real damage. He was 39, too old, too fragile, too proud to admit either. And yet, he trained like a madman. Chuck Zito bodyguard and ex-Hell's Angel was his first coach. Then came Freddie Roach, a legend in his own right. Mickey Rourke fought 8 professional bouts, 6 wins, 2 draws, 0 knockouts. But the stats didn't matter, because every fight took something away from him. He broke his nose, twice. His cheekbone collapsed from blunt trauma. His ribs cracked. His tongue was split open by an uppercut. He started forgetting things. Short-term memory faded. His hands trembled. This wasn't boxing. It was penance. And when he finally stopped fighting, the mirror showed a man no studio could cast. A once beautiful face, now unrecognizable. But he had a plan. Fix it. Surgically. Buy back what the ring had taken. Only he chose the wrong doctor. And what followed was the second beating of his life. Only this time, he volunteered for it. Rourke underwent 5 nose surgeries, cartilage harvested from his ear to rebuild the bridge, cheek implants, facelifts that pulled his skin too tight, sideburns vanished. His jawline became angular, almost artificial. He later admitted, "I went to the wrong guy to fix my face." But the truth is, no doctor could have saved what Mickey was trying to get back, because he wasn't chasing beauty. He was chasing the past. And in trying to resurrect a face the world once adored, he accidentally erased it. There's a silence that lives in poverty, especially when you've once tasted opulence. By the late 1990s, Mickey Rourke wasn't just forgotten. He was broke. Not sell a watch broke. Not cut back on luxury broke. But borrow money for food broke. The millions he made from 9.5 weeks, Year of the Dragon, Angel Heart gone. Swallowed by a life lived too large. And managed too little. He kept an entourage. Ex-Hell's Angels. Handlers. Friends with nothing to lose. He bought motorcycles. Gave away gifts. Lived like the money would always flow. But it didn't. He went from mansions to motels. From dressing rooms to studio apartments with peeling paint. One report from 1999 described his place as smaller than a garage, cluttered with ashtrays and rescue dogs. And yet, in the middle of it all, he never stopped writing. Under a pseudonym, Sir Eddie Cook. He scribbled screenplays like Bullet and Homeboy, desperate attempts to claw back control. But even the scripts failed to sell. Too dark. Too personal. Too Mickey. He once said, "I lost everything, my wife, my house, my name in the business. A friend gave me $200 a month, so I could eat. And just when it seemed like he'd vanished for good, something strange happened. A story came along, a role so close to his own life, he wouldn't even need to act. The film was called The Wrestler. But what happened behind that comeback was not a redemption. It was an autopsy. When The Wrestler premiered at Venice in 2008, critics called it a comeback, a resurrection, a miracle. But for Mickey Rourke, it wasn't acting, it was confession. The film told the story of Randy "The Ram" Robinson, a washed-up pro wrestler, battered by time, begging for relevance, risking death just to be seen again. It was supposed to be a character, but it wasn't. Every scar, every breath, every broken apology. It was Mickey. He told The Guardian, "The humiliation my character felt, that was me. I just wore the costume. The rest was mine." And maybe that's why the world couldn't look away. Suddenly, he was everywhere, again. Interview circuits, standing ovations, an Oscar nomination. Hollywood opened the door just a crack, and Mickey stepped in, like a man walking back into his own funeral. But even as the applause returned, the pain stayed, because the role that revived his career also reopened every wound. It forced him to relive the fall, the fights, the broken face, the loneliness. He didn't win the Oscar. Sean Penn did. But the audience knew. The Wrestler wasn't just a film. It was an obituary written by its own subject. And just like that, the comeback faded. There was no big studio contract, no clean redemption arc, because Hollywood loves a fall. But it doesn't always reward survival. If you want to know who Mickey Rourke really is, don't look at the films. Don't study the scripts. Listen to what he whispered. When no one else was paying attention. He once said, "I like loneliness. There's nothing lonelier than a hotel." A man who once filled theaters now found comfort in silence. Empty rooms, cigarettes in the dark, and letters he never sent. Another time, he confessed, "I write more intimately when I'm alone, but it hurts more, too." And buried inside one forgotten interview was the memory that defined everything. "When I was 12, Muhammad Ali gave me his boxing trunks. They were covered in blood. My mother threw them away. I think that was the first time I ever cursed at her. A child's moment of pride, discarded. Just like him. Just like the scripts he poured himself into. Just like the face he tried to save. During his darkest years, his only constant was his dogs. He fed them before he fed himself. He called them my angels. Therapy came later, late enough to save him from the edge, but not early enough to spare him the fall. "I was ashamed to get help," he said. "Thought it was for crazy people, but it was that or die." These aren't quotes for posters. They're not sound bites. They're scars. Real ones. And if you look closely, you'll see that Mickey Rourke never stopped performing. He just stopped pretending. Time is cruel. But it's especially cruel to men who never learned how to rest. By 2025, the comeback was long over. The applause had faded again. And the same demons from the 1990s came back for their final collection. Court documents revealed it quietly at first. No headlines. No red carpets. Eviction notices. Unpaid rent. A debt of $59,000. Another loan, $500,000. Taken just to survive during the actors' strike. For most people, this would be a footnote. For him, it was history repeating itself. Once again, the man who once commanded millions was being asked to leave the place he called home. What makes this moment devastating is not the money. It's the pattern. Mickey Rourke didn't lose everything once. He lost it. Again. Not because Hollywood conspired against him, not because fate singled him out, but because some battles never actually end. He once said, "The hardest thing isn't losing fame. It's realizing you don't know how to live without chaos." And that may be the most honest line he ever spoke. At this stage of life, there is no fairy tale ending, no grand redemption speech, no final curtain call. Just a man, still standing, with a face carved by time, violence, regret, and survival. The angel didn't fall once. He kept falling, and each time, the ground hit harder. There's a lesson here, but it isn't comfortable. For those who grew up watching him, for those who remember when movie stars felt larger than life, this story hurts because it tells the truth we try to ignore. Talent is not protection. Beauty is not armor. Rebellion has a cost. And time always collects interest. Mickey Rourke was never weak. He was too strong in the wrong direction. Too proud to bend. Too honest to fake it. Too damaged to be safe. Hollywood didn't destroy him. It simply stopped saving him. After he refused to save himself, and yet, there is something quietly heroic in his survival. He didn't disappear. He didn't end his story early. He stayed. He endured. He paid every price. And kept breathing. That's not a victory. But it's not a failure either. It's something harder to accept. Because, in the end, the angel never fully healed. The wing was patched together. With scars. With debt. With memory. And maybe that's the real tragedy of Hollywood's golden era. Not the fall, But the long life that comes after, when the spotlight moves on, and the ghosts stay, and somewhere in that same era, another legend vanished. Another icon who once ruled the screen, then quietly slipped into silence. No scandal, no goodbye, just a question that was never answered. And that story begins next.